Hello everyone, and welcome to Biology 211, and this is Foundations of Genetics. This is a very exciting time to be teaching you about genetics, and it's even a more exciting time for you to be learning about genetics. We are living in a society today where the knowledge of genetics is impacting our daily lives. It helps us understand evolution. It helps us understand the health of a cell, our own health, diseases. And even if after this class you don't become a geneticist, you'll find that whatever career you're in, particularly if you're in some science or medical field, that what you learn in genetics will impact you as you move forward with your career. In addition to your career, it's also important to understand some of the foundations of genetics as you interact with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and as you vote on important measures that may impact our future. Alright, so hopefully at this point I've convinced you that studying genetics is important. So now let's spend a little bit of time talking about our approach to genetics this semester. We're going to begin by thinking about the molecular aspects of genetics. That is, at the beginning of the semester, we're going to talk about the molecule of heredity, that is, DNA. We'll talk about the parts of the DNA molecule. We'll talk about its shape. We'll talk about the evidence that prove that DNA is the genetic material. Still under the molecular genetics, we'll talk about how this molecule of DNA can be transcribed to form RNA. And we'll talk more about transcription later, but let's go ahead and label it here. Just the process of going from DNA to RNA. And then we'll talk about how this RNA can be translated to make a protein. And we'll spend time talking about how these proteins, once they're made from specific genes here, will provide unique traits to various organisms. So I'll just draw a stick figure here. But the process of going from a very simple molecule of DNA into a complex protein, which then provides traits. And we'll talk quite a bit about this later, but these traits are largely determined by the gene over here and the environment. And this is a very simplified version. We'll talk about lots of intricacies in between each of these steps, but this is a nice summary of the first half of our semester. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move into an area called transmission genetics. Sometimes we will call this Mendelian genetics. It's the same thing. And in transmission genetics, we're going to think about how this one organism here is able to pass on this genetic material to their progeny. And we'll spend a great deal of time talking about the rules that help govern how certain traits are passed on and how they're expressed in these progeny. Though we won't spend much time in this class talking about it, it bears a little bit mentioning now. There is a third branch of genetics called population genetics. Now, population genetics, even though we're not going to spend much time on it, I do think it's important to talk about it at least briefly here. Transmission genetics tells us how traits are passed on from parents to progeny. Population genetics examines variations in populations. As I drew these progeny, I tried to indicate some variation within this population. In studying this variation, population geneticists will also examine allele frequencies with an ultimate goal of trying to understand how populations evolve. Okay, as we move forward here and we study molecular genetics and transmission genetics, we're going to do it in a context where we talk about multiple forms of life. We'll discuss the three domains that you learned about in previous classes: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. In eukaryotes, we will talk about animals and plants mainly these two groups. But we will talk about some examples using fungi. Our goal being that you learn about this field of genetics under the large umbrella of all of life. Not just one group, not just animals, not just plants, not just bacteria. As we move through this course, in addition to considering the different forms of life and genetics, as a backdrop to most things, we will consider evolutionary aspects, health and disease, what do genes and proteins do in a healthy cell, and when mutations occur, how can that lead to disease, or how can that lead to evolution? We will also bring up how what we're learning in genetics affects society. All right, now I'd like to spend just a few moments talking about the learning environment for this class. How will we approach learning genetics in this class? And I use an approach called team-based learning. And to explain team-based learning, I want to break up what we do inside the class and what we do outside of class. So up here, this is inside. And down here is what we are going to do outside of class. And I want to begin with what we do outside class. Every day before you come to class, you will need to prepare for class. What does this mean? Well, essentially, you're going to be asked to read before you come to class. However, it is perhaps unfair for me to ask you to take a chapter from a genetics textbook and ask you to learn it all on your own. So I will provide you with several tools that you can use to help you learn some of the basic concepts of genetics before you come to class. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit and show you where you can find them on Blackboard. But I'm going to list them now. You will have note-taking guides for each class. Essentially what this is just a guide to help you through what you need to know from the textbook. I will also provide you with podcasts that will go over most of the material from the note-taking guides and the readings. There might be some information on the note-taking guide that you will have to find on your own in reading. But most of what I'm going to ask you to know before you come to class is going to be found right on those podcasts. Your textbook provides another tool that I think is very helpful. It's a tool called Learning Curve. And I will demonstrate this in class for you. But essentially what Learning Curve is a series of questions that will be asked to you once you feel you have understood the material. And it will give you a pretty good idea of how well you understand the material before you come to class. Now, once you come to class, the very first thing we will do is take an individual quiz. After the individual quiz, you will take a group quiz. Each of these quizzes are identical, but one you will take on your own and the other you will take as a group. This will typically take about 15 minutes of class. After this, we'll work on applications, which could be various activities or cases that build from the basic knowledge you learned on your own. The advantage of this is that in class we will be able to spend time working on complex problems, interesting cases, and it will help you prepare for the exam. After class, you will do homework problems that are due every week on Sundays that will go over this material. Again, another way to reinforce the material. Remember, the goal is that when you take an exam, that you understand the material well enough to get the grades that you're hoping to get. In addition to the homework, you will also begin to prepare for the next class, where you will come in again and take individual quizzes, group quizzes, and do applications. Over the past several years that I've been using this approach, I've seen student grades improve quite a bit, and I've seen retention improve quite a bit. And over this first week, you'll see in real time how we're going to do this. Now what I'd like to do next is talk about the note-taking guides, the podcasts that can be found on Blackboard and through the Sapling link. I'm not going to be able to show you Learning Curve because at the time I'm making this podcast, the Learning Curve is not quite available on your link. But I'll talk about it in class and you'll see it's pretty self-explanatory once you get to it. But let's now move to the Blackboard Shell. Okay, what we see here is a Blackboard Shell for a genetics class. This turns out to be a genetics class I taught in a previous semester, but it has all the links in it that I want you to see. First, I want to look at the note-taking guides. Note-taking guides can be found under the link called Course Material by Day. Your material is linked in days collected into folders that cover each exams, as you see here. We'll look at the materials for days 1 through 11, and I'm just going to pick day 3. If I download the note-taking guide for day 3, what you see is the note-taking guide. What we have here is essentially a study guide for you. Each day there will be 2 to 3, sometimes 4 objectives that you see here. On this day we have 3. Within these rectangles here, you will see an area here that's designed for you to write questions into yourself. Maybe there was something you didn't understand. For instance, in this one, maybe you'll say, I don't know the difference between purines and pyrimidines. They still confuse me, maybe. And so that's a reminder for you to come talk to me or somebody in your group to learn more about or to understand the difference between purines and pyrimidines. But the main part is right here. These are the concepts I want you to know about in this first objective. I want you to know nucleic acids, nucleotides, sugars, bases, purines, pyrimidines. And over here is specifically what I want you to know about those concepts. So as you're writing here, don't write anything over here. This is where you write everything. So list 2 examples of nucleic acids. Well, that's DNA and RNA. That's all you need to put. That's all I asked you to know, was the examples of nucleic acids. You will then go through these and answer all these questions. And as you're watching the podcast, you'll see that the answers will be drawn for you. I recommend having your book open and the podcast available. When you're done and have this all filled out, you have your study guide for the quiz and for your exam. So each day you will have one of these. So now let's look at the podcasts that go along with this note-taking guide. But before we go to the podcast, let's see where they're at. So for day 3 here, they're in this folder where all the podcasts are for that day. This particular day, there are 2 podcasts. So let's go ahead and click on day 3 here. And as you move to this podcast for day 3, what you'll notice is that this particular one is 20 minutes long. And I'm going to just skim through it real quick here, but all the information that you need to know for day 3 on that note-taking guide is drawn out for you right here. And what I would recommend you do as you're going through this is to draw what I draw on a separate piece of paper. This will help you remember the material, and as you go back to study the material, you'll have some nice cohesive notes. In the past, students who have been successful have told me that they've written what I wrote and have filled out note-taking guides while they've been watching the podcast. So those are just some tips to do well in this class. All right, let's look at Sapling Homework now. Over here on the left, and as you open up that link, it takes you over to this icon to click on. That will take you right to your Sapling Learning Platform. In your Sapling Learning Platform, you will see lots of things. Your Sapling Learning Platform will contain lots of different information for you and lots of different activities for you. But what I want to bring to your attention is where you will find your homework. The one you will not have something called Reading Quiz. That's an older version. You will have the Learning Curve, which I'll explain in class to you. But your homework is all linked here. You click on these homework assignments, and it takes you straight to your homework that you need to do for Chapter 1. You answer the questions here. Which of the following describes a genome? And you click the answer you think is right. And then when you think you have the right answer, you hit Check Answer. And if you're correct, they'll tell you that you're correct. Then you just move to the next question. And over here it tells you how much of a percent of that question you got correct, so you can follow along. Which of the following is the most inclusive definition of a model organism? I'm going to miss this one on purpose. I'll hit Check Answer. And it tells me I'm wrong. And it will, in addition to telling me I'm wrong, it will give me a little bit of a hint here. Now, it's going to take me more than one try to get it, so I won't get the full credit for it, but I'll get partial credit for it. I lose 10% each time I miss an attempt. So hit Try Again, and if you want to, you can hit click on Hint here, and it will give you another hint. There's no penalties for clicking on a hint. So let's try this one. And now we've got it correct. And you just keep going through here and answer all the questions for that week. In addition to having the homework here, I also want to point out the fact that you have a textbook here as well. And as far as e-textbooks go, this is a very good one. I'm going to go to Chapter 1 here. And here are all the information you have in a regular textbook is right here. And there are ways in here that you can annotate. Just like a regular textbook, if you see something in here that you would like to highlight, you can highlight it, things just like so. Another nice feature of this is if you remember talking about meiosis, but you don't remember where it was at in the book, you can just type in meiosis in the search field, and it will take you to different places in the textbook where meiosis is discussed. And you can just click and go straight to those areas. So it makes for a nice, quick way to scan the book and find information you need. Okay, that's all I have for you for this first podcast for day 1. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. And I look forward to seeing you in class on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.